is the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Whoa, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through fences of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Whoa, whoa, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and they say I can't change all the things I find strange, for what can one man do alone?
Welcome back to the Liberty Test, the show where we take government policy at its word before we put it to the test. I'm your host, Dan Castello, and tonight we've got returning panelists Rose Leatherman and Robert Schuon. So tonight's topic is a tough one. It's medical aid in dying. And this one's going to be tough, so if anyone has a loved one going through a difficult time or you're having a difficult time, just be warned. Now, it's not a new topic. Actually, after nearly a decade of advocacy, New York State's legislature made history this year by passing the Medical Aid in Dying Act through both chambers for the first time. The Assembly voted 81 to 67 in April, and then the Senate followed with a 35 to 27 vote in June. And now the bill sits on Governor Kathy Hochul's desk awaiting her signature. Just this week, though, we learned that Governor Hochul isn't simply deciding whether to sign or veto. She's actually proposed a series of amendments, chapter amendments they're called, that would substantially change the bill before it becomes law. And those amendments have reignited the debate over what this legislation actually means. So let's walk through what's actually in this bill and what the governor wants to change. So here's what the bill does. The Medical Aid in Dying Act would allow mentally competent, terminally ill adults, those with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live, to request medication from their physician that they can self-administer to end their own lives. The bill, as passed already, includes substantial safeguards. 2 physicians must certify that the patient has an irreversible, incurable condition and that prognosis of 6 months or less. Both doctors must agree the patient is mentally capable of making the decision. If either physician questions the patient's capacity, a mental health evaluation is required. The patient must make both an oral request and a written request. That written request has to be signed and witnessed by 2 adults who can't be related to the patient, can't stand to inherit from them, and can't work for any healthcare facility where the patient receives care. And critically, the patient must self-administer the medication, like I said before. No one else can do it for them. Now, I think, according to my research, which you guys can correct me on if I got it wrong here, but I think 11 other states and Washington, D.C. already have similar laws on the books. And I think this includes our neighbors in New Jersey, Vermont, and Delaware. But Governor Hochul apparently doesn't think these safeguards go far enough. So she's proposed several amendments. First, she wants patients to videotape their requests for the medication. Second, she wants to add a mandatory 7-day waiting period between the request and receiving the prescription. Third, she wants to require all patients, not just those where capacity is questioned, to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Fourth, she wants to restrict the practice to New York residents only. And fifth, instead of the bill taking effect immediately upon her signature, she wants to delay implementation for a full year. Now, these proposals have sparked intense reactions. The bill's sponsors in the legislature haven't commented publicly that I could find about whether they'll accept these changes. The Catholic Conference, which has opposed the bill from the beginning, called the amendments deck chairs on the Titanic, basically cosmetic changes that don't address their fundamental objection, that the bill, quote, sanctions suicide, diminishes medicine forever, and is guaranteed to lead to tragedies, mistakes, and unintended consequences, end quote. Meanwhile, advocates who've been pushing for this legislation for a decade are caught between celebrating the legislative victory and worrying that the amendment could make the law unworkable, or at least significantly delay what they would call relief for people who are suffering right now. So, what's the case for the bill? Supporters emphasize autonomy and compassion. They argue that terminally ill people deserve the dignity of making their own end of life decisions. They point to polling showing 72% of New Yorkers support medical aid in dying, including 73% of voters with disabilities. They share heartbreaking stories of watching loved ones suffer needlessly in their final days when a peaceful option could have been available. They note that major medical organizations, including the Medical Society of the State of New York, the State Academy of Family Physicians, and the State Nurses Association, all support the legislation. And they emphasize that nearly 30 years of experience in other states shows these laws can work safely with proper safeguards. The opposition comes from several angles. Religious groups, particularly the Catholic Church, argue this crosses a moral line, that life is sacred, and that society shouldn't be in the business of facilitating death, even for those who are suffering. They point out that the American Medical Association opposes physician-assisted death in its code of ethics. Also, some disability rights advocates worry about vulnerable people being pressured to choose death when adequate support and care might allow them to live comfortably. And there are concerns about what they call the slippery slope, that laws which start with strict limitations have a tendency to expand over time. And yet, of course, this is the liberty test, and our job isn't to take anyone's argument at face value. We ask whether the policy respects individual rights, whether it creates new problems while solving old ones, and whether the government's involvement make things better or worse. Because here's what makes this issue genuinely difficult. On one level, it seems straightforward from a libertarian perspective. An individual has sovereignty over their own body. If a mentally competent person facing a terminal illness wants to end their suffering and can find a physician willing to help them do so peacefully, isn't that the most basic exercise of self-ownership and voluntary agreement? But then there's the other side of the coin. We've seen what happened in places like Canada, where medical assistance in dying started with restrictions similar to what New York is proposing and then expanded significantly. We've heard reports of patients choosing death not because they wanted to die, but because they couldn't afford housing or adequate disability support. We've seen healthcare systems designed and heavily regulated by government, where the cheapest option for dealing with expensive long-term patients is to make death readily available and even, some would say, subtly encouraged. So is this bill about expanding freedom? Or is it about giving a libertarian-ish veneer to cost-cutting in a healthcare system the state already broke? Are those elaborate safeguards, physician certifications, witness requirements, waiting periods, psychiatric evaluations, videotaping, necessary protections against coercion? Or are they bureaucratic barriers that deny dying people the autonomy the bill supposedly grants them? And when Governor Hochul proposes all these additional requirements, is she showing appropriate caution, or is she poisoning a bill she doesn't want to veto outright? Do we trust that when New York says this is about compassion and dignity, it really is about compassion and dignity? Or should we be asking harder questions about incentives, about who benefits when death becomes an officially sanctioned treatment option, and about whether people's choice to die is truly free when the system makes staying alive expensive, uncomfortable, and bureaucratically difficult? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions we need to answer before we can determine whether the Medical Aid in Dying Act passes or fails the Liberty Test. So that was a long monologue. Let's bring in the panel and find out.
Well, first off the bat, okay, just the fact that the governor wants to delay implementation until after the next gubernatorial election pretty much tells you all you need to know about it. Because this is it's a political issue, and it's a very complex political issue. It's one that, first of all, does the government have the right to decide what you can do with your own body? Does the government have the right to regulate it? And literally, they're talking about eligible people. Who's eligible to be able to kill themselves? Now, this one law is actually much, much more complex because one of the other laws in New York State is that you are deemed not mentally competent if you are a danger to yourself or others. So I would submit to you that attempting to suicide is a danger to yourself. You're choosing to not continue with life, and I understand the circumstances. It's not there's quite a difference between somebody that has a limited time frame, is in great pain. These things, everyone is sympathetic to those that have had difficulties and are in, pain and have no future. Uh, but at the same time, the second you involve the state in something like this, now you've gone down this road, and can you come back from it? This is immediately the hackles on the back of my neck start to rise. Like, okay, how is this going to be done? And are you going to create these medical boards? This is like more in terms of the socialized medicine.
Right.
Okay.
This is one of those situations where I feel like there's going to be the pure libertarian answer, which is, of course, yes, ultimately, a person does have sole exclusive ownership over their own body and life if they've made the decision, being of sound mind, that they no longer wish to remain in existence. That is ultimately something that is their own choice. It would be an act of aggression to stop them if they genuinely do not want to be alive anymore. However, when you have something that is officially allowed and sanctioned by the state and is normalized in the culture, there becomes a very serious question about, well, how voluntary is it really? There becomes a serious question of coercion. The primary argument in countries like Canada that have had this as policy for a while is when the state has a monopoly over the healthcare system, and you have some bureaucrat sitting in an office who has the ultimate say in whether or not your medical treatment gets approved. So technically, they don't have to force you to accept medically assisted suicide. If you need a treatment that's going to be extremely expensive, resources are limited. There's only just so much medication to go around. There's only just so many funds to go around for healthcare. And someone or a panel of bureaucrats decide, well, okay, I mean, he's 68 years old. This treatment only has a 32% chance of working. I don't think it's worth spending these resources on. If
Right.
requests for
At that
treatment are denied, and there comes a point at which
point, if
medically assisted suicide is the only thing that they will cover. So it's technically voluntary, but is it really voluntary if your request for any other type of treatment is denied? That's the primary argument you see in countries that have a nationalized healthcare system. In the US, we have
and it's amazing how as we move more and more towards the national healthcare system,
suddenly this is on the table when it hadn't been.
All of a sudden, this is on the table when in the past it was actually up to insurance companies, and it was up to physicians, and it was up to people directly. I mean, everybody forget Dr. Jack Kevorkian? Like, this is
He was treated as a monster by much of the
he was treated as a monster by the state and by other people, and the patients, this question, do you call them patients? Do you call them, people who wanted to suicide? But the big objection here is if there are incentives to force people into a particular form of action, okay, is that really unforced? Because again, let's say you have option A, B, C, D, E, right? Well, no, we're not paying for A, not paying for B, we're not paying for C. D, we're going to have to make you wait 3 years and you'll be dead anyway. So, you're forced into this option, and that option happens to be suicide.
All right.
But
You guys
Right.
obviously have some strong feelings about this and some very justified concerns, but let's start from the very foundation of the ethics that operate in this scenario here. Let's just ask the simple question: does an individual have the right, under libertarian philosophy, to not only end their own life, but to ask someone else to help them do it if they're willing?
it's the same question as, does an individual have the right to use drugs that could harm or destroy your body?
Mhm.
Right.
You
Like
may
they
have
can
that
ask.
right.
Someone can say no, though. Like if someone, I mean, I think in general, if someone asks, like, "Oh, I don't want to be alive anymore. Can you get me these drugs?" Most people would say, "I'm not going to help you do that. I think you should try to get help for your problem."
Well,
However,
but it's
like
also, yeah,
ultimately, though, yeah, like,
but the thing is, okay, the question is it a good idea? So again,
right.
especially in the drug
Well, now you're
case,
getting into the realm of utilitarianism here. Let's just keep
well,
it.
but this is,
But if
yeah,
you
but
do agree that individuals have that right and that you can make agreements with other individuals to facilitate the end of one's life, then if the state has as its one primary function to protect rights, then isn't New York State protecting individual rights with its proposal here?
well,
Right. I mean,
what if the state says after age 70 you don't get any more medical treatment through our state programs,
well,
Well,
it's
let
a
me
except
big
for
rephrase
issue,
this.
and
except
Let
for
me ask.
I
and
mean, here in
except for that the fact that we will help you suicide. Okay, so again, this is the second that government enters into this kind of uh, action, whatever you want to call it, policy. Okay, it becomes a cost thing. Is it more efficient to pay somebody's medical care or to just have them suicide? Okay,
Mhm.
because they can't get the care they need, or they can't
Oh,
afford
I
it,
agree
or they
with you
can't.
that the incentives that this creates is certainly a concern. And maybe the real issue is whether government should be involved in healthcare at all. But let's imagine we had that night watchman state that so many minarchists, so many libertarians want. Would that government be justified in upholding the right of an individual and another individual to make an aid in dying agreement? Or would the state be punting on its responsibility to prosecute and imprison murderers?
right. I
Well,
mean, I'm thinking back to the case of a man who had been burned over large amounts of his entire body. He spent months in a hospital burn unit. He his chances of survival were considered fairly low for a long time. He did not want to consider or to continue with treatment. Like he tried to commit suicide at least twice. The doctors stopped him. He was involved. He was held like on a suicide watch. He was so he was monitored constantly. I think at one point he was restrained.
Yeah.
He ultimately did get better, and like he said that like in hindsight he was glad ultimately that he did not that his attempts were not successful. However, he also maintained though that at that time though he did not want to be alive any longer. He had wanted to end his life, and that the medical staff had had no right to interfere and to stop him from killing himself. So
it's
ultimately, like this,
only in America. I swear, only in America, because this is the problem. Is that was the question now becomes, was he in his right mind when he wanted to kill himself?
he
I
was in
understand
extreme
he
pain.
was
So
he was in
was he?
extreme pain. He was in a bad position. His chance of survival were low.
The treatment was really torture. I mean, changing his bandages meant
Right.
pulling new
Understood.
tissue and skin off of his body. I mean,
You
it's
can't
excruciating.
bathe like for like any type of water, like cold water, lukewarm water is like it feels like you're being burned all over
And
again.
yet bathing him was part of the treatment. I remember this case. It was part of
You
Yeah.
have
my
to. Yeah,
ethics
it's
and the human health profession course when I majored in this subject. It was painful to watch. And then listening to the person be interviewed, I mean, it really struck home the dilemma we're facing here. And I'm sorry, Bob, I interrupted you.
No, I get it. And the 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 problem you run into is not just the the actual act and the state and all that. There's other factors because again, danger to yourself or others. Okay.
And the
How do you
line there, how do you
classify this?
decide? Yeah.
Right.
At
And
what
that's
point
the
can
other
a
thing
person
is
be considered to be so lacking in agency that is morally acceptable to interfere with their right to autonomy? Because again, you
this
can make
is,
the argument a person who is in extreme pain is not in their right mind and they're not able to make decisions.
I see this is one of those issues that there are no perfect solutions. There aren't even any really good ones. But the biggest problem I have with it is that as soon as the state involves itself in decisions like this, okay, only bad things can happen.
But Bob, isn't the state involved either way? Either they allow someone to help someone else die, which they could call murder, but don't, in which case they're not doing their job protecting people, or they officially say, "Yeah, you can do this, and here are some safeguards to make sure that that's really what's happening."
And I mean,
But
they
then they
were
create the
involved. That
incentives
yeah,
that you're so worried about, right? So
the
the
If
state
state
has
is
hold
to
on,
involved as
sign
long
off.
as
The
there is
state
a
has to
state.
sign off on a suicide hold. Like if you're, like the hospital can't hold someone against their will without authorization from the state. Like the professional says, I think this person needs to be on involuntary psychiatric hold because they're suicidal. The state has to sign off on that. So the state is already involved. Now we're looking at policy
but
change
now
that would do
let's
the
look at
opposite and allow and give authorization to a medical professional to help someone end their life.
let's put it this way. Let's pretend for a moment, just for a moment, that the state doesn't exist, and you have doctors, and you have hospitals, and you have insurance companies. Which doctors get health insurance for assisted dying? Because that's the see here's the question. Is this something that an insurance company is going to want to dabble into?
Yes.
Because
Pet
you
insurance
think
is an
so?
example. Yeah, euthanasia is covered in some policies. You can choose whether to have that or not.
Right, but see, a pet is not you.
Right. I
That's
mean,
the
People
we've
difference
treat their
there.
pets the way
we
they
we've
treat their children.
But
we've
that's not the
focused
point.
on
It's still again us them. Okay, it's not a case of
If there's a
us.
market, there will be an insurance policy that meets it. If there isn't a market, then there won't be.
But
right. Like we
then it's a
focused
free
on
market issue.
state policy, like countries that have currently nationalized healthcare where the state has the ultimate say in healthcare decisions,
Well, that's the
or
other
at least.
extreme.
But no, I mean currently though, let's look at how the healthcare system in the U.S. works. We have
It works.
a
Well,
works.
used to
So
work, but
it's not fully run by the government. However, it is run by giant insurance companies that are propped up and granted monopolies by the state, who it's only slightly more decentralized than countries that have a fully nationalized healthcare system. Insurance companies still have they still get to ultimately decide what type of healthcare you can access unless you are extremely rich and can pay out of pocket for healthcare. So denying if an insurance company refuses to cover someone's medical procedure, they are effectively denying that person access to the procedure, unless, again, you can come up with the money to pay for it out of pocket. So this is, similar to how things work in countries that have a nationalized healthcare system and where assisted suicide is legal. There is serious question over, okay, they're not going to mandate it, but if your insurance will only cover medically assisted dying and they won't cover your cancer treatment or your treatment for your rare genetic condition or whatever, that
right,
it's not truly voluntary.
Does
So
society have an
well,
obligation to cover very expensive, possibly lifelong conditions by stealing from some people to provide services to other people?
does the government have the right to decide to kill someone?
Yes,
And
that's
in
their
that,
primary function.
well,
technically that
okay,
is true, yes.
so like let's
They
skip
have
North
the
America
legal
for a
ability
minute,
to do it.
right? Let's go directly to England. Does anybody remember the case of the baby that could have been treated? The parents were desperate to get this baby treated with some experimental procedure. Remember, they wanted to take the baby out of the hospital, take them to America. The surgery would be paid for by donations. It already was. People donated enough money to pay for this. And England said no.
Oh yeah, on the grounds
They
that it
took
would
it
have
away
been,
from the parents
yeah, the grounds that it would have been cruel to move the infant because the baby
because
just was
being
going to
dead
die, and
is much better
right.
than
It
being
was a
cruel.
matter of, yeah, parental rights. Like the doctors
Yeah.
had claimed that
And the
that
state said
this
no.
was needlessly cruel to move the child when the child probably wasn't going to survive. I think there was debate amongst U.S. doctors too. Like one doctor said that he thought that the child might have a chance. Others, I guess, went there to examine him and said that like this probably was not treatable. So
It
it was.
seems to me that the common denominator here in all of this is that the state is a problem. It just gets in the way. But
Right.
Mhm,
because that's my bias, I want to push back against it and make sure that I'm not just giving into the temptation to be like, yeah, I'm right. You know,
mhm.
in a night watchman state situation where the state has the responsibility to protect people and uphold rights, who should they side with?
Well, this is the problem: is what define protect? Because
Well,
this is
okay.
the issue: is that because
Suppose
are you protecting their rights? Are you physically protecting their physical presence? Are you
people have the right to make decisions for their own bodies. However, suppose like I mean, this actually has happened. There's actual case law on this. There is someone who their ultimate fantasy is to be eaten, and then there is on the other side there are people who have the fantasy of killing and eating someone. So they meet. Like they make the
but
voluntary decision. Okay, I'm gonna kill you and eat you. The state
this
still
is
like is the state protecting the person who agreed to be eaten on the grounds that a person who just who agrees to something like that is clearly not mentally fit to be making such a decision, and therefore the state has the obligation to protect people from decisions like that? Like, would the state be justified in going after the person who agreed to eat the other person, even if it was supposedly consensual?
right.
Well, I wouldn't want that person as a neighbor.
Yeah, and
But this is the
similarly, if
crux of the
someone
issue. I
wants to
mean,
die and another person said, "Oh, okay, I can help you do that. I can get you drugs that will help you end your life." Like,
Right.
is the yeah, are they aggressing by potentially taking advantage of someone who is not really fit to making their own decisions? Or this is hard for me too. Like, where to draw the line? Because I generally do err on the side of personal autonomy. I think it is a very fine line between the state being able to take a person's right to bodily autonomy away from them and the state protecting someone from making a decision that they probably were not mentally fit to make. So I generally do side with the individual, but
this is where like the circumstances become massively important because the you know it you could get uh you could get into a mental state where the you may believe that your only way out is to suicide or that your only option is to end yourself. But is that state temporary? Is it circumstance driven? Is it you know based on other factors that have the possibility of being changed? Again, we go back to the case of the gentleman that was burned. Okay, he does agree that he doesn't want to be dead now. Okay, because and at what point, and more importantly, who decides these types of questions? And
well,
this
that's why
is
they want to have a like standards here. Like the law is
yeah, but
attempting to implement standards that like you have to be terminally ill with no chance of recovery. You have to have a certain amount of time left, and they're trying to introduce safeguards where like you have to wait to make sure that you've fully considered your options. So they are trying to like yeah, they're trying to implement safeguards, but Again, though, like then it introduces the question of, okay, does the state have the right to be gatekeeping, and also what is the potential repercussions of officially sanctioning a policy like this and having that become normalized in the culture? Like, what does that say about our overall culture if something like this is normalized?
I mean, there are. I mean, they've pretty much cut it out now because they've gotten a lot more strict with it. But there are how many people used to throw themselves off the Brooklyn Bridge every year in New York City? I mean, that's basically an unassisted suicide, if you will. Um, but the question becomes, how many of those were people that see? This is the problem. People in their right mind generally do not choose suicide.
Yeah, but the
And
way you
that's
just phrased that makes it think that there are times when, in your right mind, you would.
and that's but that's the question. And the big problem becomes, who decides how and when?
Well, then
And
isn't it
and,
preferable that instead
and
of
should the
throwing
state
yourself
be
off the
involved?
bridge, you get someone else's help? Because then there's a second, probably rational person who's providing their input into that decision. So if I don't know, take a crazy drug and decide that I want to kill myself because I'm out of my mind, and the only way to do that is to call up my doctor and be like, hey, prescribe me some barbiturates. And he's like, you sound like you're on something. How about we not do that? You know?
Well, but this is my problem with this is mostly that the state is getting involved. Because again,
They
if
don't
like I said,
necessarily have to, though. Like, for example, that should be the job of medical boards.
well,
Like,
but see, this is
even if they
where
didn't have the monopoly, like, okay, you have to meet certain standards to be officially sanctioned by us. One of those is do no harm, helping someone who is obviously not in their right mind and their life. Yeah, we're not going to be backing you anymore.
but
We're revoking your certification, and now you're going to have a really hard time getting hired by any hospitals in the
But
area
hold
because
on, does it have to be doctors at all? I mean, again, going back to Robert's hypothetical of no government at all, wouldn't it be at least theoretically possible that you could, Google a hitman and just have him come and kill you?
that's the
but
thing. People who are determined to remove themselves from existence are probably going to find a way to do it. So, I mean, this is kind of there's also the harm reduction
right,
argument,
but the
similar to
question
how people
is
are
that a
harmed.
reasoned act, or is that somebody who has mental issues who,
And we could be stopping them. Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is where, again, if you remove the state from the equation, okay, could you get doctors willing to do this, to make those sorts of judgments, to say, yes, you are competent, you understand the circumstances are bad enough where it is more to your benefit to end your life than it is to stay living. Will an insurance company back them on this? See, this is where, like, as soon as like you put it to the money test, if you will, is that, will an insurance company have a premium that allows a doctor to make those kinds of decisions? Because again,
In
you
theory, they're
do open
supposed
yourself
to.
up to a lawsuit, okay?
In
Yeah.
theory,
Because
they're supposed to be, yeah, advocating for the patient. In practice, though, they exist to raise money for their shareholders, and they make their money by denying as many claims as they can.
Well, you guys are
So again,
raising the question.
if medically assisted dying is cheap and cancer treatment is expensive, and they
Right.
deny the cancer treatment, they didn't force you to choose suicide. That was just
yes,
the
they did, though.
only
Yes, they
option
did.
to end your
That's just
pain.
semantics at
Well,
that
let me
point.
ask you
I
guys this.
agree
I
with
mean,
you, but
the
that's
state,
the argument. It is coercion on some level.
Yes.
to your point, the state, because it does exist, creates the incentive structure, right? They decide what insurance companies can and can't do and, what they're going to subsidize and all that stuff, right? So it can't be avoided. So do you want the doctor who's incentivized to keep you alive at all costs or who's incentivized to off you?
Well, but that's the thing, is honestly, I mean, I think in my personal opinion, yeah, they would want to keep you. They should be incentivized to keep you alive, or at least to want to treat you. Because again, keeping you alive is a more of a philosophical question, Because if you have terminal cancer and they can't cure it, you see, this is the big difference between can't and won't. Okay, because the the problem is, of course, you get into economics and money. Okay, there are scarce resources. Not every treatment can be applied to every single person. There is not physically enough assets to do this, right? So you'd love to be able to give everybody the new experimental drug that's got amazing potential, but when it costs $1 million a dose,
Hmm.
it's not physically possible
Yeah. And the
to
only reason
create
we
this.
can make the attempt is because we print money like crazy and use it to
Correct.
subsidize healthcare.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
This
Among
again,
other
like
things.
I'm thinking to like the case in Canada where there was a man who, like he, yeah, in theory, like, yeah, his claim or his request for certain types of treatment was denied because the government didn't think it was going to be successful. He felt like he was being coerced into choosing medically assisted dying because like he was told that his treatment to the like was a huge burden on the hospital staff, that it was costing over $1,500 a day, and yeah, basically he was being made to feel like a burden. And I think that's like, coercion
Right.
doesn't have to be overt. Like, suppose you have someone who like their children stand to inherit their money and their house. They are, say, in their 70s, they have some health conditions that are expensive to treat. They can choose between either like blowing through the rest of their savings and potentially losing or having to sell the house to pay off their bills and getting treatment and trying to extend their life into their 80s, or they can choose medically assisted dying and, not spend their money, leave the rest of their money and the house to their kids. Like, there's, like, you reach a point where even if your kids don't, like, aren't saying it outright, like, you'd feel almost obligated to, yeah, not deprive your kids of their inheritance and to not be a burden on them.
Have,
Like,
have either
once this becomes an official option that's offered like in a medical setting, yeah, there you worry that people might feel a sense of obligation to choose it because they don't want to burden their kids. They don't want to leave their kids with unpaid debt. They don't want to leave their kids without an inheritance, or they don't want to be a burden on their spouse or their kids who will have to take care of them.
have either of you heard of the Indian term sati? Okay.
Probably.
Now, keep in mind that I'm not that familiar with it. I could be making a grievous mistake about how it operates, but basically, it is when the male member of the household dies,
Hmm.
the widow would kill themselves,
Hmm.
okay, for either religious reasons or, to uh for to give whatever to the rest of the family. So this has historical precedence. And the problem is that, again, is that a decision that is made clearly for, for reasons that make sense, or is this a something that the culture or the government would shove down your throat? And I'm not saying they do. I mean, that's not the point, but the problem with the government getting involved in anything, okay, it's one thing if here's the deal. Let's there's the separate scenario between government and non-government. Okay, non-government, you can go to your friends, you can go to your church, you can go wherever and get enough people to feel sympathy for you and get the money to get the treatment you might need, whether it works or not. Okay, that is at least a possibility. When it is a government system, you have bureaucrats that have no interest in you whatsoever as a human being, okay, aside from political considerations, making that decision. And it doesn't matter how much money you raise, they don't care. Okay. And this is a problem with government in general, because again, it goes back to the old Milton Friedman of government spends other people's money on other people. So they don't care about the money and they don't care about the goods because it's not for them. So like having the government run programs like this is the worst of all worlds. Okay, because they'll spend huge amounts of money on it. They don't care. It's not
In
their money,
theory,
it's
though,
taxpayer money.
if that were the case, though, if they were taxing people solely for healthcare, then they should be approving treatments, but they're also not doing
Oh,
that
why?
because, well, I mean,
Yeah.
this is what
Well,
happens
they
when
will for
governments
the
run programs. The money that they take that's supposedly for that program tends to just disappear into a black hole. You have bureaucrats who are making huge salaries, who are tasked with supposedly efficient distribution of the resources that they're supposed to be in charge of. Somehow that never happens. Somehow they're never held accountable for failing to make it happen. But yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, because I'm a hard money guy. I think that if you fix the money, you fix the world. And I was
Mhm.
going to ask, what does healthcare look like when you get government out of it and you have a hard money system backing it? But then I realized that maybe the answer to that question is so scary that most people don't even want to think about it because right now we can basically put healthcare on a credit card, a societal, nationwide, intergenerational credit card. And we don't have to pay the bill right away, or at least that's what they told
Mhm.
themselves when they created, Medicare and Medicaid and all that stuff.
If you
And
qualify,
well, yeah,
if
but they keep
you
expanding it. I mean, here in New York,
because no one can afford health insurance anymore, but that's also the doing of the state by
they
their
create the
continued involvement.
unaffordability problem and then they step
Mhm.
in with grants and subsidies to try and help people pay the exorbitant price, but that just drives the price even higher. And the
Mhm.
scary thing is that this system can continue for decades before it collapses. But when it does, what does it take with it? And
that's
yet,
it.
I think that if we personalize it, like I've got a very close family member going through some very serious health issues right now, and watching him navigate the healthcare system is devastating and frustrating and enraging and it's all emotional, very wrapped up in a lot of
Right.
stuff. And
And then you think, wouldn't it be great if like you didn't have to worry about this? You could just go to the hospital and not worry that you're
but
going to
that's the
bankrupt your
thing. His
family? Yeah.
care is covered by the state. And yes, some of the challenges are caused by the state, like waiting for authorization for treatments and medications is very frustrating. But at least we don't have to worry about him being treated.
Right. Well, sort of. I mean,
Yes and no. I mean, this is yeah.
getting the government out means that we'd actually have enough I mean, okay, they keep building medical practices, and yet somehow it's still nearly impossible to find a primary doctor that's accepting new patients because, yeah, we have anti-competition or competitors veto laws called certificate of need laws. In order to build a new medical practice, you have to get the approval of existing medical practices in the area that say, yeah, we've got enough patients, we can't take care of them all, you can go ahead and build. This is in some states it's bad enough where just getting like a CAT scan or an MRI machine, you have to get authorization of other medical practices who have them. Like I remember once I needed an MRI. I had to wait over a month for it. I'm like, why does it take that long to get an MRI? Why is there only like two people in the area that have MRI machines? It's policies like that.
Realize I have
So
personal experience with this.
yeah, I
Okay,
mean,
and this is many years ago.
It's an artificial state-granted monopoly, uh, among all the other interventions, like that allows them to charge as much as they want, combined with the insurance companies that have a monopoly on health insurance, where the whole billing system it's designed to be billed to insurance and then negotiated down. Like so the sticker price on
But
a
yeah,
procedure
but
is
I'm
like
talking about
10,000
just
times what it should be.
socialized medicine. This is back, and I'm talking, oh man, got to be 20 years ago or more. Okay, I was in Canada and I got a kidney stone. I didn't know it. I didn't even know what it was at that point. I ended up in two different hospitals, and the second hospital said, "Well, you should go back to the States because we can't take care of that kidney stone for 10 days." So imagine being in that kind of pain, because trust me, it
I've
was
been
incredibly
there
painful,
in the
okay?
US, though. I've been
For
in extreme pain
10
and told that I'll have an
days.
appointment in 30 days.
Yeah, no,
So,
see, but that's the thing is that's like this was back in the day where you could go to the States and say, hey, I've got a kidney stone. I need to have lithotripsy. And the doctor literally told me to my face, you should go back to the States. They can do it right away.
Mm.
And this is what socialized healthcare does, is again, it's first of all, it's a redistribution scheme. Okay, it redistributes the money to the insurance companies, to the government, to all these bureaucrats that they all have jobs, and it limits the care. Okay, why is LASIK so cheap? Because it's not government regulated. LASIK doctors can charge whatever
Same
they
with
have. They have
plastic surgery. Yeah.
competition. Okay. They do a great job by all reports. LASIK is one of the most amazing technological achievements, and people are incredibly happy with it. A very, very small failure rate, and it's cheap. Why?
Right. It's one of the
Because it's,
few like healthcare procedures where you actually see the price going down over time rather than going
yeah,
up because there
because there's
it's still
competition. There's
competition is still limited, but there is still some type of competitive market mechanism which allows yeah, the price to come down as the technology gets better and more doctors learn how to do it and start offering it.
right. So again, we go back to the same scenario where as soon as government gets involved in pretty much anything, the price goes up, the availability goes down, everybody gets their friends and buddies on board, they get rich, and then the only person who gets screwed is the actual person at the end of the line. And that's, and again, it's all done for political. Don't even go there with the medical boards and all that. Do not tell me that they're not going to decide issues on political preference.
Oh, I
Okay,
mean, well,
that's
we have
absolutely
seen
what they
this
say.
with, oh, well, we have seen this. What was it? Oh, there was, yeah, that bill that took well over a decade to even get passed that was supposed to give health care to firefighters who had helped save people out of the Twin Towers on 9/11. Like, okay, it took forever to work its way through the system and even get passed. I just remember like one politician at the last minute saying, "Okay, well, before we pass this, let's add something to it. Let's add that if you've ever appeared on a terrorist watch list, you're ineligible." And everyone just like seal claps along, goes, "Oh yeah, that's a great thing to add to it." They're completely ignoring the fact that these terrorist watch lists are hugely error prone. Okay, we've had newborn babies accidentally end up on them because they have a name that sounds vaguely similar to someone who's ended up on a terrorist watch list. We've had political activists and journalists end up on these watch lists because they happen to piss someone off by saying something that a person in power didn't like. This is the sort of stuff that you're going to deal with if the state were to have a sole monopoly on healthcare. Like, it would not. Like, there is a genuine concern that, like, if, for example, you are convicted of certain crimes or you hold certain political opinions, that's yet another thing that the state can hold over your head, that they could revoke your access to healthcare. And if
They
they
do
have
it
the
in
sole
China.
monopoly, you can't. Yeah, you can't. You won't have
Chinese
access to
citizens,
healthcare at all.
you know,
They do this with
sorry.
driver's licenses in the US or business licenses. Yeah, like liquor licenses. Yeah. Oh, you're not doing what we say? Well, we'll revoke your ability to make a living. Okay, we'll destroy your business. Like, no, I've heard people like they first, like in some states, the state will actually revoke your driver's license if you have committed certain violations or you're behind or you fail to pay certain fines or something. So, okay, you're living paycheck to paycheck. You can't afford to pay some bullshit speeding or traffic infraction or something. So the state takes away your driver's license, and now you can't get to work, so you lose your job. Now you just fall further behind on your ability to pay all these fines and your ability to make a living, and make it, yeah, and it spirals from there.
Oh,
You
well, you
don't
don't even
want
want
to
to go
grant
there.
that. You don't
The,
want to grant the state things that they can hold over your head like that.
you heard that they just changed the point system in New York, right?
Yeah.
For that same thing. So
Right.
again, they basically added more points so that if you have any violation whatsoever, you're already in risk of losing your license. And if you get a DWI, you're instantly lost your license. So there's no second chance. There's no, you know, way to come back from that. You're just not going to be allowed to drive. And what people are going to do in real life is drive. They're just going to break the law because again, if the state leaves you no choice, and this is where do you really want the state deciding on who lives and who dies? That scares the hell out of me.
Right.
Because
I mean, and again, like they did there are supposed safeguards in place, like the person has to undergo a psychological evaluation. They have to record themselves agreeing to do it. Like a healthcare proxy can't make the decision for them. But again, like the biggest concern is not necessarily that they're going to be like someone's going to forge their signature or volunteer the person for medically assisted dying. It's that they'll be coerced into it by being denied access to other types of healthcare, and that they'll be denied other treatments until that's their only real option. So it'll be soft pressure, but it will be pressure.
well, this is this is going to be the problem. All right.
Well, let me see if I can summarize what we've covered here. I've been keeping notes because we've we've covered a lot. We've got the voluntariness question, right? So is it really choice when alternatives are bankruptcy for your family and when your disability supports are inadequate and death is presented as dignified, right? We've also got the government's role in creating the problem. So government regulations made healthcare expensive in the first place. And then the failure of that leads to the incentive to cost cut. And then, of course, we've also got licensing restrictions and certificate of need laws and things like that that limit who can provide care. So it's not like there's really any out from the government created system. And then I guess to move this forward, if we look at Hochul's amendments through this lens, her proposed additions could be viewed as bureaucratic barriers that deny dying people autonomy, or maybe as inadequate attempts to address coercion without really fixing underlying incentives, or maybe poison pills designed to kill the bill, while appearing reasonable so she doesn't have to deal with this. And then I guess, this leads us off into comparisons with other theoretically voluntary choices, like selling a kidney if you're desperate for money or taking a plea deal to avoid a trial you can't afford or something like that. But it seems to me that the platform test, the whether this policy fits our platform or not, is still kind of messy. So where do you guys come down on that question? Does this pass the liberty test or not?
I
No,
Yeah.
no. Again, just the fact that the government's involved means that it will be poisoned as
I would
time
just
goes by.
keep the state out. But the problem, though, this is one of those situations where the state already is involved because, again, like the state already has the power to hold you against your will if they declare you a danger to yourself or others because you wanted to end your own life and they've decided that you shouldn't have that right. So, and then there's the whole okay, we could say that the state should not be involved in that either, but then again, there is the serious question of like, should the state ever step in if someone is legitimately not in their right mind? Like, yeah, is that the role of the state? Is that, I mean, I would argue that that's probably more of the role of friends or family, but like, should they be able to enlist the help of the state and then the help of medical professionals? Like, that's why this is where it gets messy because it's not a simple matter of should we keep the state out or not. Like, the state already is involved, so
Well, it seems like we need to dismantle the state-created incentives that corrupt the choices before we can have a free healthcare
right.
system, and then that would also involve free end-of-life decisions.
Right. Like ultimately, yes. I like again, people ultimately have the right to make decisions for themselves. That includes the right to end your own life if that's what you really want. However, this isn't necessarily a path that we as a culture want to be headed down for the reasons we've discussed. There's the question of coercion, both, hard coercion, as in you get your insurance company denies other treatments, and also just again, once this is an option and this is something that's normalized, like people just feeling pressure to remove themselves from existence so they won't feel like they're a burden on their children or their family members or on their communities.
All right. Bob, you want to bring up our platform? Because I think there's a couple of planks that we really were relying on tonight. I think individual sovereignty, obviously, so I think that's 1.1 and 1.3. And I think the bill actually gets that right. It recognizes individual sovereignty, control over your body and an end of life decision is part of that. And then also, I think 2.3, because the bill allows voluntary agreements between patients and physicians while I think still protecting physicians who object, so they don't have to perform the procedure if they don't want to, or provide the medications if they don't want to. But then what the bill gets wrong, I think, is Section 5, right? The government will inevitably grow more tyrannical if left unchecked because there's excessive regulatory framework here. You've got, the waiting periods, the videotaping, the residency restrictions, and that sort of thing. But more than that, it treats mentally competent adults as needing state permission for medical decisions that they should be able to make on their own. Now, of course, the bill doesn't even try and address the perverse incentives that we talked about that are part of the state's healthcare system, or the economic pressures that the government either directly or indirectly created that corrupt voluntary choices. And then, of course, there's the question of whether legalizing with heavy regulation is even a libertarian solution at all. So I think the bill, it's complicated. It comes kind of close, and yet it ends up so far. Do you guys agree?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm honestly undecided on whether I would support this on the grounds of harm reduction. Or whether I don't think it's a good idea because I don't think it's a path we want to go down while the medical system exists in its present form, as in dominated by a few state privilege insurance and hospital cartels. And also while we live under a monetary system that is specifically designed to keep people in a state of perpetual debt and desperation, where people are more likely to feel like they're a burden on their family members as they reach their end of life.
Yeah, I mean, that's yeah. I agree.
I've always struggled with this one a lot.
Well, let me ask you
question
guys
is,
this.
Well, before this, okay, aside from the Dr. Kevorkian, right? How often and how many doctors were doing this?
It happened a lot. They just didn't talk about it.
Well, this is again, and there are cases, because I know for a fact that hospitals would do this quietly without saying anything, under the guise of sedating.
Okay? Yeah.
But
just like again, sedate people, so and with super heavy doses of
mercy killing is a tale as old as time. I mean, in World War I, people were taught how to, kill a wounded soldier the right way. There was a manual for it.
But do we need to get the state involved in this?
Well, that's the question. Is there a difference between the state permitting something and the state providing a framework for something? Does creating official channels necessarily create pressure to use them?
Right. Yes. I think if the state just said if someone meets these certain criteria, we're not going to prosecute you if you help someone end their life under these circumstances. That's a little different than them creating an official framework. You can get into some really disturbing stuff, like in certain countries in the European Union, where they have those suicide pods in public places where you go in and there's a questionnaire, but you could tell it whatever you want. There's no human oversight. You can make the argument that someone who has reached that stage was going to find a way to do it one way or the other, but there's just something very disturbing about the state providing suicide booths basically for their citizens. It says something about how much they value the lives of their citizens, I think.
Well, yes. What would have to be true about New York's healthcare system specifically for you guys to support this bill? Or can a libertarian support this bill while opposing the healthcare
system? Get the state out of healthcare entirely. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, this is one
Get
thing.
rid of
If you've got
certificate of need laws, get rid of the mandates, or rather the protectionist policies that prevent me from buying insurance in whatever state I want, whoever can offer me the lowest rates. Get rid of drug patents so that, like, for example, I can buy insulin over the counter at cheap prices if I have diabetes, rather than I'm sure you guys have heard of the practice of insulin evergreening, where
yeah.
a couple companies have a sole monopoly and they keep tweaking their delivery, like the patent on their, or rather their delivery mechanism, just slightly, so they can keep renewing their patent
Oh,
and
but isn't
charging
that just
exorbitant fees. Like,
capitalism and corporate greed? Don't we need the state to step in and stop that kind of
no,
shit?
because the state is artificially protecting the monopoly via the patent system. Otherwise, people could make insulin in their bathtubs for like fairly cheaply. It's that the
Bathtub insulin. Yeah, that's what I want.
it's a real thing, actually. There's actually a project called Open Insulin. It's people producing effectively open source insulin. Insulin itself is not hard to produce. I mean, I'm a molecular biologist. I could probably figure out how to make the actual enzyme itself. It's the delivery mechanism that is somewhat complicated, and that is actually what is patented and what makes it so expensive.
Let's bring this back to the topic at hand. Let me ask you guys, does Hochul's additions to the bill improve it or just make it more
I think it's irrelevant.
paternalistic?
It doesn't matter.
Irrelevant?
It's irrelevant because, again, however it starts, I will promise you it won't end up that way. Like whatever lofty goals that they intend to add to this, okay, it won't be. It's government never does things for the reasons that they state in the beginning. That's basically the bottom line.
Wait, you mean we didn't invade Iraq to bring democracy?
Well, we're about to see that.
The region.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you, but I mean, just thinking about like cases where we do have evidence, like you were talking about the EU, and of course I'm thinking about Canada. That's been a hot topic these days, and I honestly don't know what to believe anymore, but I've certainly seen people talking about like Veterans Affairs offering medical aid in dying to veterans seeking PTSD treatment. I've heard of patients choosing assisted suicide, citing an inability to afford housing. And then there's expansion from terminal illness to irremediable conditions, whatever that is. Yeah. And then you've got the proposed expansion to mature minors and mental illness as the sole condition. So if any of those things is true, let alone all four of them.
See, mental illness, by definition, the person is not competent to make that decision.
Right.
But do they have to drug you into competence so that you can say, yeah, I don't want to live like this? How does that even work?
Well, this is the problem with all of this. The thing is that, in a pure system, without the government interference, you could have groups of doctors that would basically say, yes, we agree, you're not going to get better, your life is was a quality of life. Your quality of life is not such. Look, we do it every day without government interference with our pets, right? Let's bring it back to what you were saying. We do it every day. We as compassionate, sympathetic people see that our pet is hurting, that they're not going to get better, and it's time, and that's. But
there's also times when people have bad reasons, or at least reasons the veterinarian does not agree with, and the veterinarian says, no, I'm not doing that.
That's exactly
I rescued a cat that way. He was pooping on his owner's bed. The owners didn't like it. They brought him to the vet to euthanize him. I brought him home.
I think that's the key. I think it is ultimately up to medical professionals to say, I'm not going to go along with this because I don't think that, I don't think this is in your best interest. But I mean, you can make the argument like, okay, 99% of people who go into medical care are do so because they genuinely do want to help people. You do get some sick people who manage to slip through the cracks that would make their way through medical school. I mean, even Dr. Kevorkian, okay, people who actually wanted his services did praise him. However, he was a strange person.
Well,
He was very fascinated by death, and he was
I was
very
just going to
likely
say.
doing this for in service to his own impulses.
So, Rose,
They
let me
found
ask
people
you.
who went along. Again, it's like the example of the cannibal and the person who
Yes.
wants to be cannibalized. Like,
Let me ask you guys, in light of this example you just gave, is the state wrong to create a framework? In other words, do we want a system like without government where you check into the hospital and I don't know, some happy-go-lucky Kevorkian might just off you and nothing's going to happen to them, you know? He could be like, yeah, the patient totally signed this document here, you
right.
know?
Yeah, or they
Or,
don't even have to fake anything. They just have to seek out people who are in that frame of mind. And
Well,
yeah,
and the
again,
worst
should the
problem is
state,
that
again, I think this is
it will
ultimately
attract
up to
people like
medical
that,
boards.
you know?
so then this is in favor of the state's rationale. This supports that their bill passes the liberty test.
Hmm.
No.
I mean, again, medical boards don't necessarily have to be state sanctioned. That's how the system currently works. However, the state is not any better at deciding what does and does not constitute good treatment than yeah, a network of hospitals that have decided to set their own standards and offer certifications that through results and their standards have
I'm telling you,
become the standard. Yeah.
the standard will be if insurance companies cover it. Okay, then
Under the system, yes.
yes, no,
I'm it
not
should
talking
be
through
up
the
to the
state,
doctor, but
but no, but the point is that insurance companies have quite different standards than the government does. Okay, so that if a group of doctors said, look, we want to help these people who we feel are not going to get any better, that they're having no quality of life and all of that, okay, then if an insurance company will give them liability policies for something like that, that means the insurance company believes that's a good risk. That's about all you can say in life. You know what I mean? Is that this is an acceptable risk to take. If they won't, then it's not an acceptable risk and they know it. Insurance companies go by straight up criteria. Are we going to get sued and are we going to have to pay claims? Okay? And if they're actually helping people, then they won't have that many claims to pay. Okay? You could you know what I mean? It's a completely different criteria and it's market based because they look at it from a profit and loss standpoint. Is that if we pay out more claims than the policy payments we take in, then this is not a good risk and we're not going to do it.
Mhm.
Okay? So
well, they have to actually fear repercussions, and under the current system, they don't because
right, but
again,
that's what I said. It has to be
they've
market
bought
based.
off government officials, and yeah.
Yeah, but it has to be the market. It can't be done through
Right.
government because
So
government
again, it brings us
distorts the
back
whole
to
mechanism.
we need to fix the money and we need to fix the markets, and these
Yep.
things should work themselves out. I think fixing the markets will have the downstream effects of fixing many of the cultural
Yes.
problems that we're seeing today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Boy, geez, this was a tough one.
This is one of those things I've actually always struggled with under the libertarian framework. Again, pure libertarian answer is ultimately someone does have the right to make this decision for themselves. However, individual morals are, we need communities that have strong moral and ethics frameworks to prevent abuse of a system like this.
Agreed.
Bob, any closing thoughts?
No, that about covers it. I mean, that's pretty much, look, this is a question that it's not going to be decided today. It's a question that is pretty much as old as people themselves. But for me, the downsides of government being involved in this far outweigh any possible upsides.
All right. So, let's see if I could wrap this up. I guess the Medical Aid in Dying Act doesn't fail the liberty test, at least not the way some policies do. It's not an obvious tyranny dressed up as safety, like we saw, for example, with the 3D printing bill. But it doesn't pass with flying colors either. It's trying to expand freedom, kind of, within a system that systematically undermines the conditions for free choice. And that's the real problem, right? Our show, I think, tonight touched on safeguards and waiting periods, videotaping requirements, and psychiatric evaluations, and even on concepts of autonomy and dignity. But if the discussion showed us anything, it's that we can't separate medical aid in dying policy from the healthcare system it operates within. So the real question isn't whether people should have autonomy over their own deaths. Of course they should. That's basic self-ownership. It's individual sovereignty. The question is whether they have real autonomy when the system makes living expensive and dying cheap, and every incentive points towards the off switch. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The state created this healthcare nightmare. Decades of regulation made care expensive. Licensing restrictions limited who could provide it. Insurance mandates drove up costs and created perverse incentives. Certificate of need laws restricted supply. The state built a system where keeping people alive, at least sick people alive, if you can call that alive, is expensive, and making them comfortable is even more expensive. And so now, at the end of the system, when everything is unaffordable, now they're offering a compassionate solution, air quotes, that happens to be the cheapest option of all. How about that? Death with dignity, medical aid in dying, a peaceful end surrounded by loved ones. Sounds beautiful. And for some people, in some circumstances, maybe it is. But when you're operating in a system designed to make death look attractive, I mean, how do you know the choice is free? How do you know it's compassion and not just cost cutting with better PR? You can't. That's the answer. You can't know. Not as long as the broken system remains broken. So if tonight's episode can have anything like a call to action, here it is. And it's not about this bill. Don't let them distract you with the symptom when the disease is the system itself. Push back on every regulation that makes healthcare more expensive. Question every licensing requirement that restricts who can provide care. Challenge every insurance mandate that drives up costs. And support alternatives. Direct primary care, health sharing ministries, cash pay practices, crowdsource insurance alternatives, anything that breaks the state's stranglehold on healthcare.
Yeah.
Because until we fix the broken system, we can't trust that people's end-of-life choices are truly free. And until we can trust that, legalizing medical aid in dying isn't expanding freedom. Not really. It's just giving a libertarian veneer to the problem the state created in the first place. So maybe the real test here isn't whether we support or oppose this specific bill. Maybe it's whether we're willing to ask the harder question. How did we get to a place where death seems like the compassionate option? And what would we have to change about our healthcare system, our approach to disability support, our attitude towards suffering, before we could honestly say that choosing to die is a choice made in freedom rather than desperation? And those are hard questions. They don't fit on a bumper sticker. They don't make for easy political talking points. But they're questions that matter. And if the libertarians won't ask them, who will? So the bottom line, the fight isn't over this bill. The fight is over whether we'll accept a healthcare system designed to make death look like freedom. And that's a fight we can't afford to lose. So this has been the Liberty Test. I'm Dan Castello. Good night.
Where will you be when the order is given to censor your mind as free speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world will be driven away by the sound of a bellowing thunder and choke on